Good morning, lads. I'm well, thanks.
Are you a darts fan?
Not really.
Yes.
Yeah, not really. I mean, the shows are great. They're great atmosphere, but I wouldn't be tuning in. My dad loves the darts and be mad trying to talk to me who beat who, but not so much me, no.
Well, let's talk football then. It's a very cruel world where Slaven Bilic finally seems to crack something and wakes up to the papers this morning he's getting sacked.
It's amazing, isn't it? It really is. I think they've obviously, looking at that situation, expect West Brom to be brushed aside comfortably by Manchester City. But they got that point that they probably felt they should have got against Tottenham before Manchester United. But to get that point is a real shock last night. It just shows you the problems that City are having. But take nothing away from West Brom. That was impressive.
Look, if you're the owner of the club, you get to make these calls, and that's your prerogative. But the list of candidates is like, we might go back to Big Sam or somebody like that, or Mark Hughes. And it's like really, you may as well. I don't know. I like the notion of sticking with the manager who got you up, and then, okay, maybe you do go down, but you give yourself a much better chance of staying up the next time you come up because that manager has acquired the information and the knowledge and has learned from it.
Yeah, no, listen, I agree with that in many aspects, Jer, but I think sometimes you can assess something and think, well, listen, that was the perfect manager to get us in the Premier League. Do we need one to keep us there? Now, someone like Sheffield United probably is in keeping with your argument there, Chris Wilder, who's having a terrible time, but I'd be amazed if they got rid of him. I think he's a problem solver. I think he will get it right. But with Bilic, they obviously have identified they're not convinced, and it'd be interesting to see how that plays out today.
It's almost like there's obviously not a one-size-fits-all approach to this, but there's kind of a similar theme around Scott Parker at Fulham and the way he's managed to steady that ship over the last few weeks. Like there were talks that Scott Parker probably wasn't the man for the job when they got promoted, which seemed ridiculous at the time, that they'd almost got promoted one season too early and that he would struggle, and he's learned very, very quickly, it seemed.
Yeah, but you're absolutely, and I think at times you can assess, regardless of the results, whether or not the team or the club is on the cusp of something. Now, that probably lends itself to what Edu is saying at Arsenal, that everything is great, whereas we're seeing the results and thinking, well, no, I'm not quite sure about that. But as a player, certainly you know when something's about to start. And I think you're right with Scott Parker. A couple of those signings that come in, Loftus-Cheek, make a real difference. He changes the system a little bit, he's a problem solver, even as a relatively inexperienced manager. So that's impressive. That bodes well for his future. He's able to address in what is the toughest league and to get Fulham firing again. But you're right. I think a lot of Arsenal supporters have looked at what Edu has said and said, what are you talking about? Everything's right. How can it be in terms of the results, in terms of we're seeing fallout from players? But I think sometimes when you're there, you can assess what is happening. But I think results dictate whether or not that's going to last any length of time.
You mentioned Arteta. We may as well talk about him now.
Yeah.
Where do you think we're going with this?
Well, I think it's such a difficult one, Jer, because obviously they finished the season so strongly. He's playing that back three, and it kind of tightens them up. It covers a lot of their sins. But he obviously wants to play a 4-2-3-1, and he's tried to do that recently, and it just doesn't work. And the reason for me, the glaringly obvious reason is the two centre-halves are vulnerable, so you need two centre midfielders who can protect them. And Arsenal don't have that athleticism. They certainly don't have it in Xhaka, Ceballos. Partey obviously looked like, with that performance at Manchester United, that he could possibly do it, but he's had these injury problems. And that's where he's going to have to rethink it, Arteta, I think, because we're looking at a scenario now where initially he wanted to tighten out. We've said this before, that he's done that, but the offset is offensively they've been so poor. And you're looking at Aubameyang now where no goal in open play for so long. Lacazette doesn't look like he's going to get a goal. I'm not convinced that he can play that 10 role. So I think it's a challenging times for Arteta. And I think to make sure you can get through it, you need the players on side. And I think that Arsenal changing room is slowly starting to ask questions of their manager. Now, he might identify that there's a young generation coming through that can take Arsenal, but whether or not they're ready now remains to be seen. So I think as much as they do and the board are saying that Arteta is the man to take us forward, I think it could get a little bit worse before it does get better.
Do you think that the biggest issue that some of the players might have with Arteta might be his, I guess, acceptance of the behaviour on the pitch of someone like Granit Xhaka, while at the same time publicly condemning Nicola Pepe for his red card a few months ago, and Mesut Ozil getting frozen out, and the way that those players are probably communicating with one another away from the training ground, for example?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that as players, you want consistency. Certainly, you want your manager to you want there to be a hard line and no one's allowed to go over it as such. But Xhaka just seems to really convince the managers of his ability in training, that he works hard all the time, but he just seems to let the team down so often. And he's been brought back in after obviously having that set to with the supporters, and then to do what he done in the last game against Burnley, it's just ridiculous. It really is. And then what it does is highlights then his performances and his contributions as a player, because Arteta talks about trying to get the team back scoring, but that service into them from the players like Xhaka, Ceballos, it just isn't good enough. And those two midfielders were given a nod ahead of the likes of Torreira, Guendouzi, because they have that footballing ability. But if you offset that against how vulnerable those two are out of possession, how poor they are in trying to make challenges, the lack of athleticism, then that's a real problem. And I think that's something he's going to need to address. Maitland-Niles performed well in that midfield with his athleticism in the Europa League against Vienna. So whether or not he gets the nod now, I think that would be a good call, because certainly Thomas Partey doesn't seem to be anywhere near coming back just yet. But I think it is a real concern for Arsenal now, because you think about how Arteta's schooled at Barcelona, and then he's the understudy to Pep Guardiola. So everything about the build-up of those type of managers is about structure. It's about getting the opposition fatigued by moving them about, possession-based football. But then when you get into the final third, certainly Guardiola gives those star players the license then to express themselves there. Henry talked about it at Barcelona, how disciplined he had to be there, as opposed to how he was at Arsenal. But if we think about how Arsenal have played throughout the Premier League, and certainly with Wenger, it was about that ability to unlock defences, that kind of, not off the cuff, but that ability to just produce something. We're seeing none of that now, and that's a real concern.
They knew that he was inexperienced when they signed him to be the manager, so they must have understood that there would be growing pains. Do they just ride out the growing pains, and this is a 2-year project, and you say that now, and you say, look, I don't really care if there are factions in the dressing room, that's grand, they'll be gone either this transfer window or the next one, because Arteta is our guy?
Yeah, no, listen, I generally believe that he should be given more time. I don't think it's a case of get rid of him as such, because I do think it does take time, but I don't think Arsenal have that financial muscle to change it very quickly in terms of getting rid of these players. The frustrating thing, and certainly a stick to beat him with, is that his signings, the likes of William, just haven't produced. But Arsenal have had a history of players coming in. There's a young centre-half they brought, Saliba, for £30 million. He doesn't even make the squads, and they're looking to move him on. So you can't lay everything at Arteta's door, but it's going to be a slow one. I think he's going to have to integrate those younger players and give them their opportunities in the big games. But whether or not they're good enough to do that and to get Arsenal back where they believe they belong, that remains to be seen. Spurs-Liverpool
is a conversation that we've been already having a little bit about this morning. It seems like Jose Mourinho is doing his very best to get under Jurgen Klopp's skin. Is it going to work?
Well, he's reacting here. He is in terms of he's passionate. Jurgen Klopp. He's already said that Mourinho doesn't care about style, so that's one to kind of like just to put him back in his place a little bit. But it's a fascinating game. It really is, and I expect there to be real fireworks, not just on the pitch, but maybe in the dugouts alongside them. I'm really looking forward to that game. In terms of how well Tottenham have started, defensively so strong. But then obviously with likes of Son and Kane up front, who can maybe take advantage of the injury problems that Liverpool do. And they do have injury problems. Mourinho may say he doesn't know of any injuries other than Van Dijk, but there are issues with Liverpool. There's no doubt about that. The very fact that Henderson and Fabinho, two centre midfielders by trade, finished the last game at centre half. So if they were to start that, I would fear for Liverpool. I really would. But what will be fascinating is that the tactics that Mourinho adopts in terms of that low block, defensively strong, allows the opposition to really get in and around their penalty box. If you do that to Liverpool, it's so vulnerable in terms of how good they are. Let's not forget, not just because Mourinho's there at Tottenham, and I know they're a very different Tottenham team, but Tottenham have only won twice in 28 games at Anfield, so it's not as if they go there and regularly feel comfortable. But I think that's going to be a fascinating game. I can't wait for that.
What do you do if you're in Liverpool's situation where you know exactly where the danger is coming from tonight, and yet if you are going to win this game, you actually need to do the thing that puts you in danger anyway, so that you need to go and attack, and you need to try and create chances, and you need to get bodies forward, but every time you do, you're vulnerable?
Yeah, well, listen, this is something we've seen with Liverpool in terms of that high defensive line, that we felt they have been vulnerable. But it doesn't change the way they play. Even look at the game against Fulham. Cavaliero's getting in so often with that high line, running in behind Fabinho, Matip not really getting their communication right. So I don't think that, well, I know, in my opinion, I don't for one moment feel that Klopp's going to change it. I think there'll be little adjustments as such, and making those players aware, as you just said, Jer. But I think he feels that he can press Tottenham. He can stop that service into Kane and Son. So the emphasis really is on those front three closing, and certainly those midfielders making sure they're blocking any passing channels. But I think it's difficult to stop Son and Kane, because they can go from deep in their own half to getting a striking goal so quickly. So it's a fascinating tactical battle, and it's two of the best Premier League managers. People may well say that Mourinho was a spent force, but he's proved his quality in terms of getting Tottenham back up there again this season.
This was the sort of game that Jurgen Klopp might have struggled with 2-3 seasons ago, where a team has a low block and Liverpool just can't figure a way around them, and maybe they get caught in the counter-attack. Are we not beyond this point now, where tactically a game like this is under real threat from Liverpool, or have we seen enough, I guess, chinks in the armour this season, Gary, to suggest that actually they are there for the taking tonight in this way?
Oh, yeah, listen, if you had to pick, I think if anyone was saying you want to go up against Liverpool and you wanted to pick a couple of players who are brilliant on the counter-attack, then it's Harry Kane, it's Son. We've seen it throughout the season. So they will be relishing going up against this Liverpool back four. Whether or not Matip is fit, we don't know just yet, but I think it's important that he is. But it might be a case of Jurgen Klopp just saying to his fullbacks, listen, make sure when you are looking to go forward, you do it when we've got really good possession of the football. And if we don't, just make sure you're 5 yards a little bit deeper so you can recover. You can engage Son if he does pull out wide, or if Harry Kane drops deep, can your midfielders collect him? So all those messages will be clear to those players. I mean, even without the instruction from your coach, from your manager, those Liverpool players are intelligent players. They know what Tottenham's strengths are. But I think Liverpool have evolved. I do believe that they don't change their defensive tack just because of the opposition. I feel that they think that they can stop the opposition making those passes. So it remains to be seen whether they can.
Do you have any concerns about Tottenham and how tight their games have been over the last few weeks? That it has been... They have just been really tight. The result has been in doubt going into the final 10 minutes, and a lot of the games have obviously dropped a couple of points at the weekend. That we're talking about this team as if they're beating everybody at the moment, but they aren't. They are dropping points. Like, it is going to be the sort of season where 70-something points is going to win it, so it might be okay in the end, but like there's not a sort of situation of diminishing returns coming here with Tottenham, is there?
But those points are certainly, I would look at as any Tottenham fans must be so frustrated with the 2 points that they dropped at home to Newcastle. They battered them, concede late. They're 3-0 up against West Ham, Owen. You don't expect them to lose that, and they draw that game. So there's the points there. The game against Crystal Palace, that's 22 games in 13 weeks for Tottenham, only 13 for Palace. So you do expect Palace to come strong late on. So I think obviously Liverpool have had a heavy workload and schedule as well. I think they're growing. I think they're becoming more and more a Mourinho-like team in that that those drop points early in the season. I don't think we'll see that many of that happening later on. Obviously, fatigue will play a part, but it will for the whole of the league, for the whole of football. But I do feel that Mourinho's Tottenham team are not able to be expansive and take teams on that way. They're not going to be at the top of the league if they did that. But they found a way of playing with Højbjerg's been brilliant in midfield with Sissoko. And then obviously Ndombele gives you that physicality when he drops back to beef up that midfield, but that quality in terms of ball possession, travelling with it, and that skill showing why Tottenham plays so much money for him. But I think that back four, and I've said this to you guys before, when you look at it on paper, it doesn't seem that impressive individually, Tottenham's, in terms of Dyer at centre-half, but he's getting better and better. The two full-backs, great going forward. I'm not convinced defensively yet. As a collective, they have been so impressive, the best defensive record in the Premier League. But when you go to Anfield against Klopp's Liverpool team, that will be tested.
Who do you give the credit to for the step up from Eric Dyer this season? I know at the start of the year he was like, I want to play this position, and I'm sure a lot of it has come from him. But I guess Jose deserves a lot of credit for that too.
Well, listen, if you ask Mourinho, I'm sure he'll be saying it. He is the one that has rejuvenated Dyer at centre back. When he initially came in to Tottenham, under Pochettino from Sporting Lisbon. I know he was young and he played at centre-half, and I felt, no, he's not capable of it. He doesn't have that mobility, doesn't see things early enough, and I liked him playing in that holding midfield role. But I think as the years have gone by, he's identified that he wants to play centre-half, and he's been so impressive. He's a leader, he's a communicator, and he's quicker than I thought, to be perfectly honest. But I think there's real challenges for him today. Those full-backs for Tottenham, if they get in those advanced areas and the quality that Liverpool have from those wide strikers attacking from out to in, will mean that he'll be squared up in positions he won't want to be against Salah, against Mane. So it's important that he does get those midfielders around him. And I think as a centre-half, he has real attributes, but I think his vulnerabilities are protected by the fact that Højbjerg sits in there, Sissoko sits in there and protects him so much.
Sounds like you're leaning towards a Liverpool win.
It's so difficult, Jer, because obviously I can see the strengths of Liverpool. You don't want them in and around your goal, and Tottenham do concede that ground. We know that they have the ability, Salah in tight moments, Mane. But you just look at Tottenham and you think about Mourinho and how they play, given the fact that their injury problems. I don't like sitting on the fence, but I can see this going either way.
Yeah, all right. Enjoy the game, whatever happens. Gary, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Some thoughts there from Gary Breen. We'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180. Is this, guys, it got the hallmarks of a stalemate 0-0 where they both decide, sure, look, this isn't where the league is going to be won or lost?